So it might be overwhelming to think about making a survey and then how do I make that creative? Maybe a better way to think about it is, what am I already doing that's creative? And then how can I slip in a little bit of data analysis or information gathering into that activity itself? Hi, my name's Elinor Whidden, and I've been in the arts for 20 years. I'm an artist and an educator, and I joined Arts Etobicoke on the Visualizing Deep Data project in the capacity as a member of the advisory team in 2019 and worked with them until 2023.
Hi there, my name is Maggie Hutcheson. I'm a community engaged artist and curator, as well as an educator, and I was a member of the Visualizing Deep Data team from 2019 to 2023. Elinor and I were invited onto the Visualizing Deep Data team because of the co-creation work that we'd done with community members as our artist collective, Department of Public Memory. And as Department of Public Memory, we co-created signs, events, and what we called memory archives to commemorate overlooked organizations and sites in Toronto. We worked very closely with the people who knew these sites best, and we never thought of this work as data collection. We thought of it as remembering, as producing knowledge together to foster artful civic dialogue. But in our artistic practice together, which was well over a decade, we developed methods for moving with participants into surprising, nuanced, and richer stories and discussion than we would arrive at using a typical survey or a qualitative interview. We developed multi-sense memory prompts, we worked with images and objects, and we got really good at asking questions to arrive at specific and rich insights. So our role on Visualizing Deep Data was to bring our forms of artful dialogue and question asking to the project. The project team was interested in learning about artistic practices in specific neighborhoods in Etobicoke to better serve the communities in them. So we started by developing a list of 100 ways to ask about place. We also developed flashcards to prompt specificity when discussing art forms, art practices, so we could better understand the cultural practices that Arts Etobicoke community members enjoy and are curious about.
So like Maggie said, we were invited to this project in our capacity as artists. And at the beginning on the consulting team, we were really helping to kind of flush out the scope of the project. So like Maggie said, coming up with 100 different ways to ask about place, really kind of spending time brainstorming what kind of questions to ask and then how to ask them. And so we were involved in coming up with some creative or unusual ways to begin asking these questions to the community. And one of the first events that we planned was something called the Feast of Ideas. And we invited a whole bunch of people who had known Arts Etobicoke for a very long time, had a very sort of close connection with the organization. And we put on a big feast where there were multiple courses. And for each course, the group of participants would move to a different table and there'd be a different art activity. So the flashcards that Maggie mentioned were used. We had different objects that would prompt things. We had blue skying on a napkin. And they were all these different ways that we were trying to tap into people's knowledge and their connection with Arts Etobicoke and kind of gain this richer sense of the organization through the eyes of these people, beyond, like Maggie said, standing there with a clipboard. And this was a really wonderful event. It was very well attended and very much enjoyed. Unfortunately, then the pandemic hit and we had to figure out how to do a lot of these creativities online. So if you're going to embark on this task of collecting data, there's a few really important things to consider in terms of who's collecting the data, how are they collecting that data, and what might the impacts be on the community. And I think the first step of this process is some self-reflection. So really thinking about who am I, who is our organization, and thinking about, are you an insider or an outsider to the community? And if you're an insider, how are you connected? What are those specific connections? Thinking about how somebody might read you if you're engaged in this process of data collection. And sometimes you might realize that you're actually not the right person to do data collection. And if you realize that, then it's just spending the time to forge the relationships or build the partnerships to find and make sure that you train up the right person to do that data collection. I think it's really important to think about why somebody might want to give you their stories or give you their data. What's in it for them? What are you going to do with the data? That's really important. So things like consent, permission, and ownership are all really important to think about at the onset. You cannot be exploitative or extractive. People must understand why you want their data and what you're going to do with it. And sort of as an addendum to that, Maggie and I found in our role as the Department of Public Memory that it was often really important or more fruitful if there was a sense of urgency for what you were going to do with the data. So if there was something that was maybe felt to be needed by the community or wanted by the community, or a question that they were intrigued in, then that desire to participate in this back and forth of data collection would just yield much richer results.
So when you're collecting data from or with a community, it's really important to think carefully throughout the process about ethics. We're all asked for our data all the time, actually. And the more systemic barriers an individual faces, or the more marginalized a community is, the more data they're asked for in their daily lives. And much too often, communities don't have control over their own data, or the data collection does not serve or benefit them. So Arts Etobicoke didn't want to replicate a transactional or kind of usury approach to learning more about community interests or needs. And it was important to our team to be transparent about why we were collecting information or data. How it would be used. We needed to ensure that some forms of data would remain or could remain anonymous. And I think it became really important to us to ensure that the process of learning more, the process of what we were calling data collection, was itself meaningful and interesting to the people who were sharing their perspectives. So in some cases, we were moving the process from data collection to co-production of meaning. Community members weren't just research subjects, they were creatively and critically reflecting with Arts Etobicoke, so that Arts Etobicoke could better serve them. And I think I'd like to think they were having a lot of fun in the process and learning from it and enjoying it. I think one of the main reasons why it's important to be creative is because creative processes can transcend language barriers, and really allow people to delve in across differences, and to fully engage. I also think it's important to engage creatively because it helps to move people beyond what they think you want to hear. So often in a research process, research participants, if they're framed that way, are really trying to please the researcher. Like, they want to help you, and they want to answer in a way that they think you want them to answer. And so if we want to really understand people's perspectives, it's very important to move outside of that frame. And you can do that by engaging through the arts, through arts activities.
So there's a number of reasons why it's important, or it can be useful, to be creative when you're collecting data. And Maggie just spoke to a couple of them in terms of this potential for a much richer, co-created kind of experience. So something that's fun and intriguing and engaging is a better kind of non-extractive relationship for our participant. But if someone's willing to spend more time, there's a potential for you to kind of dig deeper and get to richer or more nuanced or more just kind of unconventional data. And so I think if you're able to set up an activity or an experience where you're leading someone through a journey, or you're getting them into a particular headspace, then this can be just essentially more conducive to sharing beyond the basics. I think that creative activities can yield different response by using more than just words. So when we go beyond words to use things like objects or images, or even a clip of music as a prompt, it's a way to kind of think about things in an open-ended or non-judgmental way. And just by framing things in a different way, not just using words, but framing a kind of experience in a different way, you're going to get these unexpected sound bites, or these unexpected kind of revelations, or kind of little nuggets of information. I think the final thing about using creativity in some capacity is It's a way to show respect. It's a way to show that you've put a lot of time and energy and thought into creating a situation that's not extractive or sort of exploitative, and that you ultimately are going to treat the information that you receive with care and respect. And it sort of is a way to not just say, but to show that you really are valuing that person's time and the information that they're sharing with you.
So, as an arts organization, you can use your existing strengths by starting with a reflection on the relationships you already have. So, who do you know? Who are you in relationship with? Who are your existing communities? And how could you work with them to produce relevant data that will support you in your mission and vision? Um, I will also say it's important to reflect on who you don't know, who it will take time to build relationships with. But again, looking from an assets based perspective, you can think about who on your team is best positioned to begin to develop those relationships. Um, another way you can build on your strengths as an arts organization is to think about where and how you are already collecting data. So this might be in your arts evaluations, in your visitor feedback, in even in team debriefs, meetings you're already having with program partners, or it could be in your artistic activities themselves. So when you take a close look at what you're already doing, you'll start to realize how much data you're already analyzing, even if it's informally and you've never thought about this as data collection or data analysis. Um, and you'll also begin to see opportunities to build in an extra question or to tweak a lesson plan or to integrate collection of the information you need right into your existing activities. So it might not be a radical overhaul. You can think about how you could even minorly build out your daily operations to learn what you need to learn. And I think this was the experience for Arts Etobicoke, was actually a realization that in fact Arts Etobicoke was already collecting a lot of data.
Organizations can really use their strengths by thinking about, what do I do? What do I do well? What do I already provide to the community? So maybe that's orchestral music. And then thinking about, how can I weave some analysis into that? So, like Maggie mentioned, it's not necessarily about reinventing the wheel, but it's kind of about looking at what you're already doing and thinking about how you can layer data collection into that. I think it's overwhelming to think about, how do I collect data and then make it creative, but possibly less overwhelming to think about, what do I do that's creative, and how could I sort of slip in a little bit of data collection to what I'm already doing and doing well.
I am still a bit wary thinking about stories and community knowledge as data, only because often data has been treated as this kind of raw material that then somebody else, a knowledge producer, gets to analyze and make meaning of. And I reject that. Like all of the co-creative processes I care about and think are ethical and meaningful are processes where we are making meaning together. At the same time, it can be useful to think about the kind of work that I do or about stories as data because it can put the ethics into really sharp relief. So there's a lot of really important there are really important ethical frameworks around how to work with data, and I think those can be applied um, to arts-based practices, to story work, to community engaged work in a productive way.
So when I talked about a sense of urgency, yielding richer or possibly more nuanced or interesting data, I was really referring back to my experience with Department of Public Memory. And we were working at a time where there were a lot of closures to public services, and we were talking with service users and staff and trying to get these stories out. And there was a lot of strong emotion and kind of urgency to people really kind of were committed to or understood what we were doing with their data and felt like they wanted to engage in that process. when I talked about urgency, I think we often all feel, particularly with social media and stuff and the online world, that we're constantly getting extracted from. And so if you can feel some level of, maybe urgency isn't the right word, but connection to, or a desire to participate in where this knowledge is going, and how it might be used, and how that relates back to you. Why would I care? The question that's always, why does this matter to me? As a participant. I think that is just something to consider, and particularly as Maggie speaks about the ethics, and that often these results are taken and then by somebody else, and then things get done with that knowledge. I think thinking about, from a participant's point of view, what would be the urgency or the reason for connection is an important kind of question to ask yourself.
It's just really key to informed consent in research processes. People need to know why they're sharing information with you, what the purpose is, how it will be used, etc. It's pivotal to informed consent. And of course, if the people you're collecting information from or working with have a sense that it will benefit them or their community to share this, then the process will be much richer. Co-production of meaning is a dialogue-based process, whether it's arts-based or dialogue-based in some way. This is communication between people to really to make new knowledge together that that one person couldn't make by themselves. And it requires really nuanced communication. It requires really active listening. And I think it's what community arts is all about. That might be one of my definitions of community arts, is co-production of meaning. And it can be profoundly rich, as we know.
I think when we consider this question about respect and respecting the data or the information that you're collecting, this is a really key point, because, as it's been mentioned, people feel like they're having things extracted from them all the time, and that they're not necessarily in control of or know what's being done with that data. And I think that, when you show that ways that you can show that you value the time that somebody has spent, and it's not just the time that they've spent. You spend an hour talking with me about this, but it's also sharing, when you're sharing personal memories or recollections, or possibly even things that are vulnerable, or you're taking a risk to kind of put that information outside of yourself and give it to somebody else. I think it's really important that you wear the hat of somebody who is entrusted with something very special and valuable, and that you show the person that you're thankful for that, and that you're going to treat it. You're going to treat this information in a way that they will feel good about. And so it all weaves into the ethics and the informed consent, and what are you going to do with this? And sometimes, when Maggie's talked about this co-production, if you take the data and then you kind of put it together in a way, you analyze it and you create something, that would be the point at which you go back to those participants and you say, did I get it right? Does this seem like I'm using this? And perhaps in this case, I'm talking more about qualitative data than quantitative data. When you're a number in a bar graph, you might not feel as vulnerable. But if a snippet of your history or your story has got incorporated into something, and the bigger context of the frame no longer fits, then that could be really disrespectful to somebody. So I think respect is also the knowledge that this is a very long and engaged process. It's not a quick one-off where you're standing with a clipboard, you're crunching it through an Excel spreadsheet, but that there's this long kind of back and forth relationship that you've built with someone, that really shows that you respect. Unfortunately, this project kind of hit its stride just as the pandemic hit, and the staff at Arts Etobicoke ended up putting together these art packages when they realized that there were families that were living in some of the apartments and high rise in the neighborhood who weren't going out, who weren't getting kind of any outdoor time or have any activities, maybe be on television. And they put together these beautiful art packages, and embedded in those were some questions and some surveys. There was this sort of paint by numbers survey where if you use certain colors, you would answer certain questions. But the point was you didn't have to answer the survey. It could also just be a coloring book tool. So that was one example. And as we began to do more and more online delivery of programming, we really tried to think of ways where we could kind of break beyond that screen. We had musicians that would play at some of our events as an almost way to break the ice or set a headspace, and people would be drawing and listening, being serenaded by a musician. We sent packages in advance where people could prepare and bring objects that were significant to them, or some of these flashcards that we described before, they would get a series of flashcards. So then when they were on the screen, they could share something from their package. And we were trying to find ways to forge connections and make relationships in this time of isolation with these creative tools.
If this organization was a sound, what sound would it be? Or if this breakfast program was a touch, what would that touch be? And people often thought they were quite strange, and also had these questions, and also had the most brilliant, insightful answers to those questions. So I think of that as an example of creative data collection.